October 1943. The United States Navy was deeply involved in a global conflict that stretched across oceans and continents. World War II had forced nations to push science and technology to limits that had never been imagined before. Radar systems, advanced submarines, long-range bombers, and new communication technologies were changing the nature of warfare. But somewhere on the eastern coast of the United States, inside a heavily guarded naval shipyard, a different kind of experiment was about to take place. It was an experiment so unusual that even many people within the military did not fully understand what it was meant to do. The location was the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. Docked quietly in the harbor was a naval vessel known as the USS Eldridge, a destroyer escort designed to protect larger ships from submarine attacks. To most sailors, the ship looked completely ordinary. Steel hull, naval guns, radar equipment. Nothing unusual. But inside the ship and around the dockyard, technicians and scientists were installing equipment that no sailor had ever seen before. Large electrical generators, massive coils of cable, complex control panels connected to unknown devices. The goal of the experiment, according to some accounts, was to test a new type of technology that could protect ships from enemy radar detection. If the experiment worked, naval ships could move through dangerous waters without being easily detected by enemy forces. But what happened next would become one of the most mysterious stories of the war. Because according to the legend, the ship did far more than become invisible to radar. Some witnesses later claimed it disappeared completely. Stories about the experiment began spreading years later, long after the war had ended. According to these stories, the project had been inspired by theories involving powerful electromagnetic fields. Scientists believed that if a strong enough field could be generated around a ship, it might bend light and radio waves around the vessel. In theory, this could make the ship extremely difficult to detect, perhaps even invisible. During the test, the USS Eldridge was supposedly surrounded by powerful electrical generators that produced an enormous electromagnetic field. Witnesses later described a strange greenish fog forming around the ship as the generators powered up. The air itself seemed to shimmer with energy. Crew members nearby reportedly felt their hair stand on end as the electrical equipment began operating at full power. Then something strange happened. The ship appeared to fade. Some observers claimed the vessel slowly became less visible, as if it were dissolving into the air. Others said the fog grew so thick that the ship vanished entirely within it. For several seconds, the USS Eldridge could no longer be clearly seen from the dock. Then, suddenly, it was gone. For those who claimed to witness the event, the disappearance lasted only a short time. Moments later, the fog began to fade. The shimmering air slowly returned to normal. And just as suddenly as it had vanished, the USS Eldridge appeared again in the harbor. At first glance, the ship seemed unchanged. But according to the stories that followed, the crew had experienced something terrifying during the experiment. Some sailors reportedly felt intense nausea and confusion. Others described strange sensations, as if their bodies had briefly lost their sense of balance or direction. Even more disturbing were the rumors that began circulating later. Some accounts claimed that a few crew members had suffered severe physical and psychological effects after the experiment. Others said the crew had no memory of what happened while the ship disappeared. These stories were never officially confirmed, but they would go on to become one of the most mysterious legends connected to World War II. A secret experiment, a disappearing warship, and a story that continues to fascinate people even today. The day of the experiment began like many other days during the war. The docks at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard were active with the usual movement of sailors, engineers, and military personnel. Ships were being repaired, supplies were being loaded, and crews were preparing for future missions. But around the USS Eldridge, something unusual was happening. The ship had been prepared for a special test that very few people fully understood. Technicians moved carefully around the deck, checking large electrical cables that had been connected to powerful generators. Inside the ship, additional equipment had been installed, devices that many sailors had never seen before. Orders were given for the crew to remain at their stations. No one was told exactly what would happen next. As the generators began to power up, a deep mechanical hum filled the air. At first, it was barely noticeable, but slowly the sound grew louder. The large coils surrounding parts of the ship began producing powerful electromagnetic fields that crackled faintly with energy. Nearby sailors reported feeling strange sensations. The air seemed charged. Metal surfaces vibrated slightly. And then the light around the ship began to change. Some witnesses later described a faint glow forming around the hull of the USS Eldridge. A greenish haze slowly appeared, spreading across the ship like a cloud. As the energy levels increased, the strange fog around the ship became thicker. Observers on the dock watched as the USS Eldridge slowly began to blur, as if the air around it had turned into moving glass. Some witnesses later claimed they could still see the outline of the ship, but it appeared distorted, almost like a reflection in rippling water. The generators roared louder. The electrical hum intensified. And then something even more unusual occurred. For a brief moment, the ship seemed to flicker. Several sailors watching from nearby vessels later reported that the USS Eldridge did not simply fade away. They claimed it vanished completely. The space where the ship had been moments before now appeared empty. The water of the harbor moved normally. The dock remained in place. But the ship itself was gone. According to some accounts, the disappearance lasted only a few seconds. But those seconds were enough to create one of the most mysterious stories of the entire war. Because rumors soon began spreading that the USS Eldridge had not only disappeared, it had appeared somewhere else. One of the most persistent stories connected to the experiment involves another naval location hundreds of miles away. According to later accounts, sailors in the harbor of Norfolk, Virginia reported seeing something extraordinary on the same day of the experiment. They claimed a naval ship suddenly appeared in the water for a brief moment. The vessel looked like a destroyer escort similar to the USS Eldridge. But just as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished again. If the stories were true, it would mean something astonishing had happened during the experiment. The electromagnetic field may have done far more than bend radar signals. It may have briefly displaced the ship from one location to another, almost like a form of teleportation. Of course, these reports were never officially confirmed by the United States Navy, and historians continue to debate whether the event actually happened as described. But the mystery surrounding the Philadelphia experiment only grew larger with time, because the question remained, if the stories were false, why did so many people believe they had witnessed the same impossible event? When the USS Eldridge reappeared in the harbor, the ship itself seemed intact. From the outside, there was no visible damage. The hull looked the same. The deck equipment was still in place. But according to the stories that later circulated, something very strange had happened to the men on board. Witnesses claimed that several sailors appeared disoriented when the experiment ended. Some reportedly staggered across the deck as if they had just woken up from a deep sleep. Others seemed unable to stand properly. A few crew members were said to be extremely nauseous. Some sailors complained about severe dizziness, as if their sense of balance had been completely disrupted. Medical personnel who were supposedly nearby tried to assist the crew, but many of the sailors struggled to explain what they had experienced. Several of them reportedly said the same thing. During the moment when the ship disappeared, they felt as if time itself had stopped. They could not describe movement. They could not describe darkness. Instead, they said it felt like reality itself had briefly vanished. For them, the experience had been deeply unsettling. As the story of the experiment spread, even more disturbing claims began to appear. Some rumors suggested that a few sailors experienced unusual physical effects after the test. According to these accounts, the powerful electromagnetic field may have affected the human body in ways that scientists did not expect. One of the strangest claims involved sailors who supposedly became partially invisible for short periods of time after the experiment. Other stories describe crew members who appeared confused about their surroundings, as if their perception of space had been altered. Some sailors reportedly avoided standing near metal surfaces or electrical equipment afterward, saying it made them feel uncomfortable. These stories quickly became part of the growing legend surrounding the experiment. However, it is important to understand that many of these accounts came from second-hand sources and rumors that appeared years after the war ended. Very little official documentation about the supposed effects on the crew has ever been publicly confirmed. Even so, the mysterious nature of these stories continued to capture people's imaginations. The idea that a secret experiment had accidentally pushed science beyond its limits was fascinating to many. Another part of the legend involves the psychological impact that the experiment may have had on the crew. Several later stories claimed that some sailors struggled to talk about the event. According to these reports, certain crew members became extremely reluctant to discuss what happened during the test. Some accounts suggested that the sailors had been instructed not to reveal any details about the experiment. Others claimed the experience itself was so confusing that many of the men could not clearly remember it. This uncertainty only made the mystery even deeper. Over time, the story of the Philadelphia experiment began spreading far beyond military circles. Writers, researchers, and historians started examining the story from different angles. Was it a real experiment that went wrong? Was it a misunderstood naval test that later turned into legend? Or was it simply a story that grew larger with each retelling? By the 1950s and 1960s, the tale of the disappearing ship had become one of the most famous wartime mysteries in the world. And yet the biggest question still remained unanswered. Did the experiment really happen at all? As the story of the Philadelphia experiment spread across the world, historians and researchers began asking an important question. Did the event actually happen? During the years following World War II, thousands of military documents were gradually declassified. Researchers gained access to naval reports, ship logs, and technical records from many wartime projects. Naturally, many investigators searched for evidence of the experiment. They examined records connected to the USS Eldridge. They studied the ship's service history. They looked for any official mention of a test involving electromagnetic invisibility. But according to the documents that have been released publicly, there was no confirmed record describing an experiment where a ship disappeared. The official naval records showed something very different. The USS Eldridge had been constructed in 1943 and served as a destroyer escort during the war. Its primary mission was protecting convoys from submarine attacks. According to the ship's logs, the vessel spent most of its operational time escorting ships across the Atlantic Ocean. The timeline recorded in naval documents did not match the dramatic events described in the legend. This created a major question. If the experiment never happened, then where did the story come from? One possible explanation involves a real technology that was used during World War II. This technology was called degacing. Degacing was a process used to protect ships from magnetic naval mines. These mines were designed to detect the magnetic field produced by large metal ships. If a ship passed close enough, the mine could detonate. To prevent this, naval engineers installed special electrical cables around the hulls of ships. These cables carried electrical currents that reduced the ship's magnetic signature. The process required powerful generators and large coils of wiring equipment that could look very unusual to sailors who did not know its purpose. Some historians believe that sailors who saw this equipment being installed may have misunderstood what it was meant to do. Over time, stories about the technology may have become exaggerated. A simple magnetic protection system might have gradually turned into a story about invisibility and teleportation. In a time of secrecy and wartime rumors, it would not have been difficult for such stories to spread. Another important piece of the mystery appeared years later. In the 1950s, a man named Carl Allen began sending strange letters to a researcher who was studying unusual wartime events. In these letters, Allen described the Philadelphia experiment in great detail. He claimed he had personally witnessed the disappearance of the USS Eldridge. His descriptions included the green fog, the powerful generators, and the ship vanishing from the harbor. These letters were one of the main reasons the story became widely known. However, when researchers later tried to verify his claims, they found many inconsistencies. Some details did not match the official records. Other parts of his story changed over time. Because of this, many historians believe the Philadelphia experiment may have started with a mixture of misunderstanding, rumor, and imagination. But even if the experiment never happened exactly as the legend describes, the story itself became a powerful part of wartime folklore. A mysterious ship, a secret experiment, and a legend that continues to capture curiosity decades later. Even though many historians believe the Philadelphia experiment was likely a misunderstanding or an exaggerated story, the legend refused to disappear. In fact, as the decades passed, the story became even more popular. During the 1960s and 1970s, books about unexplained military projects began appearing around the world. Many of these books included the story of the USS Eldridge and the mysterious experiment in Philadelphia. Readers were fascinated by the idea that scientists during World War II may have been experimenting with technology far beyond what most people believed was possible at the time. Stories about secret research, hidden projects, and advanced science captured the imagination of millions of people. Soon the Philadelphia experiment was being discussed not only by historians, but also by writers, filmmakers, and researchers interested in unexplained mysteries. Television documentaries began exploring the story. Radio programs debated whether the experiment could have been real. And audiences everywhere asked the same question. What if the experiment had actually worked? What if, for a brief moment during the war, science had crossed a boundary that humanity did not yet fully understand? The mystery eventually reached Hollywood. In 1984, a science fiction film called The Philadelphia Experiment was released. The movie told a dramatic story about a secret naval experiment that accidentally sent sailors through time. While the film was fictional, it helped introduce the legend to an entirely new generation. From that point forward, the story continued to grow. New books appeared. Television specials examined the mystery. Online discussions debated the possibility that the experiment had been part of a hidden military program. Some people believed the government had covered up the truth. Others argued that the story had simply evolved from rumors and imagination. Regardless of which explanation people believed, the story itself remained powerful, because it combined three elements that have always fascinated humanity: war, secret science, and the unknown. Today, more than 80 years after World War II, the Philadelphia experiment remains one of the most famous wartime mysteries ever told. The official records of the United States Navy say the event never happened. Historians continue to find no clear evidence that a ship ever disappeared in the harbor of Philadelphia. Yet the story continues to survive. Perhaps because it represents something deeper than a simple historical question. It represents humanity's curiosity about the limits of science. It reminds us that during times of war, governments often develop technologies in secret. And it shows how easily a mysterious event can grow into a legend that lasts for generations. The USS Eldridge still exists in naval history as a normal warship that served during World War II. But in the world of mystery and legend, it became something else entirely. A ship that vanished. A secret experiment. And a story that still makes people wonder, what really happened that day in Philadelphia?